This episode dives into the winning run from Season 11 of Alone. Maybe you haven't heard of Tim yet, but he is absolutely the blissful true god that all 12 Alone.
Oh my goodness, it's a beast! La 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 la.
The contestant who has harvested the most food through hunting in the show's history, Tim was chomping on meat literally every single day out there. And he didn't tap out because the Arctic winter beat him, but because he was sitting in a shelter, chewing jerky, and feeling like it was nothing special. Next, in 20,000 words over 50 minutes, I'll walk you through how Tim ate meat every day and enjoyed the wild in the Arctic Circle. This video is a bit long, so grab sunflower seeds to snack on, and toilet viewers should reconsider watching. And remember to like and subscribe to support me. Day 1 of the challenge, Tim hops off the helicopter and instantly makes a wordless pact with this wild land. No way out, only a contest with nature. Every step here tests his survival instincts. Tim wants to explore the surrounding area, but before heading out, he organizes his safety gear, an air horn, bear spray, and a bear deterrent device. More than winning the title, he cares about getting back safely to his wife. Since wild animals have sharp hearing, Tim picks heavy arrows that fly more quietly, so they're quieter in the air when he shoots. Moose can pick up sounds from more than 2 miles away, so having the right tools is critical for a hunt. This alone is enough to show just how professional Tim is as a hunter, and that all stems from his lifelong way of living. A top-notch lumberjack, Tim's lifelong outdoor living has sharpened his already exceptional hunting skills, but also made building shelters and living in the wild second nature to him. After he had a family, raising kids in the countryside was cheap, but money pressure kept piling up. So he signed up for a loan to win the cash and help his family out. Tim pushes through the brush to the riverbank.
I see moose tracks right off the bat, and grizzly bear tracks.
The animal footprints by the riverbank caught his attention, except for black bear footprints. What caught him off guard was finding more moose tracks than he'd expected. From all those tracks by the river, there's almost certainly a moose close by, but grizzlies love strolling that flat shoreline, so Tim ducks into the woods to track the moose. Right then, a piercing squirrel cry hits his ears. He immediately raises his bow to hunt, and with just a single arrow, he manages to take down a squirrel in the brush. His hunting skills were now initially proven.
I've got this squirrel already. This is excellent. Excellent.
That squirrel in hand guarantees dinner tonight, and he's eyeing its guts as bait to hook some fish. In McKenzie and the Delta, there are walleye, trout, pike, and whitefish. For these omnivorous fish, squirrel guts are just about the ideal bait. As Tim wiped that squirrel blood onto his shoulder, a low-key $1 million survival showdown was set in motion. In the time that followed, Tim hunted a second squirrel, and dressing it, he used the innards as bait on fishing hooks. Only once he's sure food will keep coming in does putting up a shelter really feel comforting. Tim plans to put up a temporary shelter, and his many years of living in the wild, he's completely in his element while building it. After just a bit of work, Tim whipped up a sloped shelter that already checked all his ex-wife's boxes for staying there a full week. With that done, all he needed next was to build a permanent shelter based on how much food he could secure. This survival approach is simple and dependable. At the shore, checking his line, Tim saw it had paid off. The tight line told him something was hooked. When Tim reeled it in, sure enough, there was a pike on the end of the line. You have to admit, Tim's luck is insanely good. This 25-inch pike could give Tim about 1,750 calories of energy and 370 grams of protein. All those calories he spent on the shelter could finally be paid back. Tim immediately started a fire to cook. It's worth noting that it's autumn in the Arctic Circle now, and at this stage, the sun sets at 10:15 p.m., so Tim simply doesn't have the time to process and preserve the fish. All he can do is stew every bit of food he has and then sit down to a massive feast. Tim trimmed the pike meat and filled his pot with rich fish stew. While the fish is simmering, he warms his belly with 2 squirrels. 2 squirrels can give him about 600 calories. Even if he doesn't feel full, there's no need to worry. A whole pot of fish is enough to fill him. From day 1, Tim was in the zone. That kind of dream start really boosted his confidence for the $1 million showdown ahead. We fast forward to day 5. These days, Tim's biggest headache has been his drinking water. Every time he boils water, he must wait a long time before drinking it, and leaving extra water in the pot is a real hassle. So Tim decides to turn his quiver into a water container. He melts some wind wax and coats the inside of the quiver so it soaks into the material and seals it against leaks, then fills it with cool boiled water for storage. With the pot freed up, he can keep using it to boil more water or cook food. One quiver can hold 4 liters of water, enough for Tim's daily needs. However, his bow and arrows lying around still need to be sorted out.
Every time I carry these arrows around with my bow without them being secured, I run the risk of...
Tim's spot on. If you don't lock down your bow and arrows, you're really asking to get cut. And that leads us to this season's contestant Carby, who actually got hurt hunting when his bow and arrow dropped and stabbed him. It ended up stabbing into the inner thigh, right where the femoral artery runs. If the femoral artery had been severed, Carby could be in critical blood loss danger in 5 minutes. It was only the first day of the challenge. Carby was forced to tap out on day 1 after that injury. But for a pro hunter like Tim, he'd never let that kind of accident happen to himself. He trimmed 2 bits off his shoulder guard leather, folded them over, then punched a small hole in each. These openings hold the arrow shafts. Tim threaded the leather with a mushroom bone arrow to make a holder that attaches to the bow. He fixed this holder onto the bow. It can secure 4 arrows at a time for hunting in the wild. Out there, you normally just get 1 chance, so 4 arrows is plenty on paper. It keeps the arrows locked in place and spares him the annoyance of loose shafts jabbing him on the way out.
I think that'll shoot just fine.
Tim headed to the shoreline with his bow and arrows to scout. Despite bear tracks along the shore, he'd been here 5 days and hadn't seen a single bear. Suddenly, he spotted fresh moose tracks on the ground. That was a good sign. Tim followed the direction of the moose prints. From day 1, Tim had set a clear goal. Large game would be the core food source for this challenge. If he could take down a muskox like Roland, or nail a moose the way Jordan did, and the title would basically be in the bag. Pushing through the brush, Tim came upon a patch of wetland. Lying in the marsh was a bull moose. Tim quickly realized he was upwind. He immediately understood he couldn't stay where he was. The wind would carry his scent straight to the animal, which would make it much more alert. So Tim decided to circle around through the grass to get closer to the moose.
I think I'm gonna try calling to it from right here.
His imitation calls did indeed catch the moose's attention. The moose stood up and was about to leave. If he wanted that meat, Tim had to go all in. On his second call, the moose wavered. Noticing that, Tim kept imitating the moose's calls. By the third call, Tim's heart was practically jumping into his throat. He had never tried cliff diving into a hunt like this for a moose before, but the moose still came in toward the call, closing the gap to roughly 150 meters. Too far to shoot, so Tim moved closer, bow and arrows ready. Right then, the moose glanced his way and started drifting off. That moment was probably Tim's best chance to make the kill.
Okay, got another chance.
The first attempt failed. The arrow landed right under the moose's belly. Luckily, the moose wasn't spooked into bolting, which gave Tim a second chance. Sadly, that second chance slipped away too. Tim hadn't noticed the branches ahead. A branch was between him and the moose, blocking Tim's shot. Tim's heart went from hot to ice cold in the time to lose 2 arrows. That branch didn't just stop his arrow. It practically skewered his heart along with it. Back at camp, Tim looked like his soul was gone. Worse than any breakup. Almost in tears, he couldn't bring himself to do anything. The greater the hope, the bigger the disappointment. In a blink, 7 days had passed. Ever wonder what Tim did those 7 days? Each day he came back here, searching for that moose, hoping that bull would appear in front of him again.
The feeling of defeat that settled in was beyond my life as much as I wanted that bull moose.
Was the only place where he'd ever seen a moose. Moose are huge and need lots of water, and this spot just perfectly fit what they live on. Tim still has more chances to run into a moose, but before he gets any red meat, his main source of food is still fish. He wants to weave a gill net to catch more fish, and it happens to be his eldest son's 9th birthday, so he decides to turn this net into a birthday gift for him, letting it become part of their shared adventure. Tim believes this net will bring him good luck. By a little after 7 p.m., the net is still not finished, so he heads down to the river to check his lines. Lately, his energy is focused on the moose. The camera cuts, and Tim holds up a 34-inch pike. In that moment, he forgets the pain of failing to hunt the moose, lost in the thrill of the catch. Checking the second line, he hits again and hauls up another pike.
Tonight we feast! Thank you, Lord, for this beautiful fish!
And his son's birthday quietly turns into Tim's lucky day.
Happy birthday, Elliot.
On the morning of day 13, long-term malnutrition has impaired his blood clotting, and Tim suddenly has a nosebleed. His concern is that the blood scent will draw in black bears, whose sense of smell is 2,100 times keener than ours, and they can smell food from miles off. Tim deals with it by tossing the blood-stained leaves into the fire, which is indeed a pretty good way to handle it. Once the nosebleed stops, Tim immediately throws himself into building a permanent shelter. The fish caught yesterday will keep him fed for 2 days, and the growing gap between warm days and cold nights signals winter is coming. So, building a solid warm shelter is especially important. Tim weighs different shelter options based on the materials at hand. Each huge log weighs hundreds of pounds. Anyone with a bad back wouldn't even attempt it. But for Tim the lumberjack, these huge logs are nothing out of the ordinary. He opts to throw up a lean-to right there, saving himself the hassle of dragging logs all over and saving a lot of hard labor. The last time we saw someone manhandle 100-kilo logs for a shelter was Machine Roland in mid-season 7. From this build, Tim's got that prize in his sights. Tim stuffs moss into gaps between logs and hammers it tight with stones. Wood has natural insulating quality. When winter temperatures suddenly plunge, the log walls can effectively block the cold air outside. Meanwhile, moss acts as a natural windbreak, can effectively block the intrusion of cold air. Tim finished building the log cabin shelter in just one day, drawing on years of lumberjack know-how and sheer strength, giving Tim an unmatched edge in both stamina and skill. Give him a decisive edge in this extreme environment.
Look at my fortress!
As Tim throws himself into building the shelter, he starts to see just how well things have been going for him. He watches the shelter rise, and when hunger hits, fresh fish keeps him going. Everything seems calm and harmonious. But just when it feels like Tim has forgotten his original million-dollar goal of hunting a moose, a sound behind him snaps him back to reality.
Sounded like the gate of a moose.
Tim jumps to his feet to check it out. At long last, the moose he's been waiting for appears again, but a grouse suddenly swoops in and scares him half to death. Irritated, he snatches up a stick and flings it at the grouse, but his vendetta against it will have to wait. But for now, that million-dollar mission still needed his full attention. The moose was still far off, remembering his last failed attempt. This time, Tim chose to circle around via the river and come up behind the moose to hunt it. Let's take a moment to break down the environment Tim is in. His shelter is set up over here. After hearing the moose, he forced through the trees and entered the meadow, spotting it off. He chose to circle around via the river and come in from behind the moose, which is where he is now. And I'll toss in a quick spoiler. Once Tim shot the moose, it bolted into the nearby woods and lay down there. With the scene now clear, we go back to the footage. It's autumn in the Arctic Circle, the moose rutting season, so bull moose are especially active. Tim moves to the downwind side of the moose and once again imitates a cow call to draw it in. The moose not only comes closer, it actually stops about 50 meters in front of Tim to graze, giving him an excellent shot. From the bubbling sound after the arrow hits, you can tell it struck the moose's lungs, letting air escape from them. Tim knows full well this moose is as good as dead. The indescribable excitement on his face says everything about how thrilled he is right now. At this moment, it's no exaggeration to say one of Tim's hands is already touching that million-dollar prize.
How much noise I don't care what the noise does. The biggest game here is down.
Waiting an hour, the moose finally goes down for good. It weighs around 1,200 pounds, 188 pounds heavier than Roland's 900 gin musk ox, and it's hard for one person.
Oh my goodness, it's a beast!
The budget. A massive moose means a huge haul of meat, but also an unprecedented challenge. With the temperature sitting around 14 degrees Celsius, unfrozen moose meat will usually start to spoil within 12 to 24 hours, so Tim has to work fast to process everything before the meat goes bad. He starts by gutting the moose, since bacteria multiply in the organs 3 to 5 times faster than in the meat. This step also quickly lowers the carcass's overall temperature, slowing bacterial growth and buying time for further butchering and storage. At the same time, Tim fears the scent of moose blood will lure in black bears, whose noses are 2,100 times keener than humans. He builds a fire nearby. To many wild animals, the smoke and smell from the flames are a powerful warning signal, dulling or eating up the smell of blood. Meanwhile, he cooks meat over flames, because dressing out a moose is brutally hard work. Even a seasoned butcher with full gear might need 6 to 8 hours to process a single moose. Although Tim has experience butchering large game, although he's skilled with big game, it's his first moose, so grabbing some roast meat mid-butchering to keep his strength up is essential. Tim first removes the moose's limbs, then moves on to the other parts of the carcass, and it's not until after 7 p.m. that he's finished only half of the animal. The rest of the moose will have to wait until tomorrow. Before dark, Tim still has to drag all the butchered meat back to camp. The camp is 1.6 kilometers away, and with 500 gin of meat, he needs 5 trips, a truly brutal haul of physical work. That night, by the fire with his roast, Tim's bigger concern is the other half of the moose still lying out there. With this ecosystem so dangerous, he decides against hauling meat all night. This area holds over 5,000 grizzlies, and it's long prowled by wolverines and other night hunters, highly active after dark. Real killers of the night. Tim has no intention of risking his life just to save a bit more food. He can only hope the scavengers don't strip the moose carcass clean. At first light the next morning, Tim rushes back and finishes butchering the moose and notes that no grizzlies came. Seeing the bare skeleton, He thinks it might make good soup stock. Though the moose is fully butchered and at camp, his main concern now is preserving all that meat. Arctic autumn temperatures reach 14 degrees Celsius. Anything over 4 degrees Celsius no longer keeps food fresh. It doesn't just stop keeping food fresh, it actually speeds up spoilage. Tim plans to build a meat storage box by the river, using the river's convective cooling effect, since warm air tends to rise and cold air sinks. This creates a cooling effect and chills the surrounding ground. But stashing a slab of meat in the wild is trickier than it sounds. Beyond keeping the venison cool, Tim also has to shield it from moisture. A moist environment is ideal for bacteria to grow. Tim fells plenty of trees and stakes the logs into the riverbank to build a wall. He has to keep the meat box as dry as he can. And while he's lugging the logs, he hopes winter hits fast. Now, the earlier it comes, the more it works in his favor. If the timing of the moose hunt is off, then this whole challenge might be for nothing. When Roland shot his musk ox, it snowed heavily the next day. For Roland, that blizzard hit with ideal timing, terrain, and luck. Tim lines bottom with pine branches so air can circulate in the meat box, stores part of the meat in it, and weighs it down with hundreds of kilos of logs as a safety measure. So even if a grizzly tried bouncing on top of it, the box would stay put. Tim thought this meat cache was solid, but the next day, a mink gave him a rude awakening. A small mink steals meat and eats it right in front of him, and Tim can't do a thing about it. When he built the meat cache, Tim ventilated it for air circulation, but he didn't turn the meat smell into a sealed beehive, and the gap was what the mink exploited with its small body advantage. The mink made off with the moose's heart and fat. Viewers of last season's champion Jordan will remember, fat is key to surviving winter. Jordan nearly starved to death while eating roast meat every day because a Wolverine stole his reserves. Because in the bitter cold of winter, what the body burns through are sugars and carbohydrates. And fat is crucial for turning sugars and carbs into energy. The moose fat stolen and eaten by the mink is a loss for Tim. Venison is a high-protein, low-calorie food. So at breakfast, Tim tosses the venison and fat together into the iron pot, letting the rendered fat soak thoroughly into the meat, which boosts the energy density of the meal and helps safeguard his health out in the wilderness. Even the leftover frying fat can't be wasted. Tim crafts a birch bark tube sealed at both ends and pours the leftover fat from the pot into it.
It's sealing. Yeah.
From just one breakfast, he's able to stash a few hundred grams of venison fat, giving him a reliable energy reserve for the coming winter. For the rest of the fresh venison, Tim decides to use his new wooden shelter as a smokehouse. Jordan was the first to try this in an earlier season, hanging venison inside his shelter to smoke it. And in Season 7, Roland used the same method to smoke his musk ox meat in his shelter after the hunt. It saves him from having to build a separate smoker and lets him preserve the meat faster with less work. Tim pulls a big piece of venison from the meat box, planning to slice it into strips, string them up, and hang them in the shelter to smoke. Cutting the meat into strips speeds up smoking and dries out the moisture more effectively, which is ideal when you need to preserve meat quickly. In recent days, he has found bear tracks on the riverbank 3 times, so the thought of smoking a big batch of meat in there makes him uneasy. But that wooden shelter is the only place he can use for this, and he can only trust it to hold if a grizzly comes. Right now, he has to cut up the rest of the venison as quickly as he can, then haul into the shelter to smoke. Every day outside is a gamble. Tim strings venison along the shelter roof. The shelter smells of raw venison as Tim starts a fire. Heat control is key when smoking meat. Too much heat will over-dry the meat, while if it's too cool, it can't properly kill bacteria. Smoking hundreds of pounds of venison takes days. During this stretch, Tim has no choice but to sleep in his tent. After a punishing race against time, he finally gets to slow down and taste the venison.
This is a pot of total goodness. So I'm gonna sit here and eat my fill.
He tosses moose fat and venison into an iron pot to fry, and the meat in the fat gives off an incredible aroma. As he tastes the first venison, the fatigue and aches from days of toil melt away. Each bite of meat felt like the perfect payoff for all the work he'd done. Tim feels hopeful about the wilderness survival ahead. After 3 days in the shelter, the smoking is finally done, and Tim returns the smoked jerky to the meat box by the river. Maybe with that stash of venison, he's so relaxed he doesn't put the lid on his yogurt. Behind him, the fluttering spruce grouse doesn't catch his eye at all. With life a bit better now, he figures his looks should match, so Tim shaves his beard with an arrowhead. Using the same bow and arrow that took down the moose, Tim shaves with an arrowhead stained with its blood, not knowing what that feels like. For now, he's nearly finished. But butchering and hauling that moose has already burned through over 10,000 calories. Right now, he's craving a decent bed, and before settling into his new shelter, he wants to make a bed. Right now, he wants to eat well, sleep well, and take the title. Victory seems inevitable. In Arctic cold, ground steals heat 3 times faster than air. A bed raised off the ground is absolutely crucial for staying warm. Tim also laid spruce branches beneath the bed to block the cold and keep it warm. It's basically like giving the bed a down jacket. Once the frame was done, he laid another layer of spruce branches on top as a mattress. After eating his fill, he lies back on the bed. And in that moment, nothing feels more comfortable. Putting together the wooden bed has drained him far more than he'd anticipated. Tim realizes he's not as strong as when he started. Even basic chores now leave him wiped out. Maybe the hard work the past few days, plus not staying warm, has left him with a cold. The alternating chills and fever sap energy. Hopefully, he pulls through. On day 21, the production team issued medical checkup notices to all contestants. All of them feared they'd be pulled from the competition due to health problems. Aside from expected weight loss, most were judged to be in decent shape.
We need to officially extract you for medical reasons.
It's a pretty serious, it is not safe to continue.
My brother had an obstruction. Take out about 7 feet of his intestines.
Only Jack, who had recurring stomach pain, was diagnosed with an intestinal blockage. To protect his health, the production team made Jack withdraw and go to the hospital for further tests. Although one contestant had to quit early due to medical problems, the survival challenge itself did not stop. As the days continued to pass, Tim once again saw a moose near his shelter. A cow with 2 calves strolling across the meadow in front of him. He watched the cow and her calves pass, and calm slowly returned to him. Seeing the moose seemed like a reward for his perseverance. Winning an extreme cold survival challenge is not easy. Though Tim has plenty of moose meat, it's still not time to relax. Winter hasn't fully arrived yet, and he needs to use this window to get properly prepared. Days of grueling work, coupled with undernourishment, left Tim dulled and in a state of brain fog. It's hard for him to focus on the job, and he ends up slicing his thumb with the saw. Out in the wild, a cut is serious. If you don't treat it properly, it can get infected and progress to sepsis, which in turn can cause tissue damage, organ failure, and even death. Even a small mishap could end a contestant's run in the competition. Tim plans to rub spruce branches on the cut on his finger. Spruce contains natural antibacterial compounds that help suppress bacteria and other microbes, helping reduce the risk of wound infection. In such a harsh survival environment, keeping wounds clean is absolutely critical. After tending to the wound, Tim thinks about his state. His mind keeps obsessing over completing various tasks. Even though nothing urgent awaits, it's likely the pressure, lack of sleep, or overwork that's causing this brain fog.
I gotta kick back and just take it slow.
Enough food keeps you alive, but mental strength decides victory. Hopefully, Tim can steady his emotions and face the coming extreme cold. As the days pass, the wolf howls around Tim's shelter grow more and more frequent, keeping him awake almost all night. In autumn and winter, especially as winter draws near, wolves tend to call more often. As the season changes, food becomes scarcer, and wolf packs howl more to warn other groups off and to locate prey, or to lay down sound-based markers of their turf. At dawn, Tim spots wolf prints in the grass nearby. Wolves usually move in packs, and if a pack has claimed this area as its territory, the area around Tim will grow even more perilous. More than his own safety, he worries more about losing cached meat. With bow and arrow, Tim goes along the river to the moose kill site. On the ground, he finds fresh bear tracks, and from the depth of the claw marks, he can tell this bear may weigh up to 500 pounds. For Tim, after 10 days of nothing but moose, this isn't bad news. He's craving a different taste, and Tim's ready to get and dress out a few hundred pounds of meat. But when Tim returns to the site where he'd butchered the moose, the leftover bones are gone. Only 3 legs remain on the ground, and Tim figures the carcass was dragged into the willow thicket. If a grizzly really is living somewhere nearby, Tim's situation becomes even more dangerous. Since both the wolves and the grizzly are competing for this area, Tim, the highest IQ guy out here, isn't about to back off. He grabs some spruce branches. Then he chooses this spot to leave his own mark. A smart move indeed. Tim uses the height of his urine stream, spraying it across the branches, hoping the bear will see this urinating creature as massive and feel a bit scared. Short guy, big guts, urine arcs to the sky. Morning of day 29, a flock of geese flies overhead. Migrating geese are an important sign of seasonal change, meaning the cold winter is about to arrive, and a layer of frost has formed on the grass.
This is what I dreamed about. This is awesome.
The winter Tim waited for is here, with the biggest meat reserve of the contestants. This winter actually favors him. In the Arctic Circle, atmospheric circulation can rapidly flip temperatures from mild autumn to bitter winter cold, so the contestants have little time left to upgrade their shelters. Tim piles dry grass onto the roof, a method that greatly improves the shelter's insulation, but also blocks cold air and reduces heat loss. It's a natural, simple, and highly effective survival technique, crucial for facing the extreme cold that's about to set in. Tim's shelter really does look sturdy and well built. He's obviously chasing that $1 million prize. With a shelter that stays warm, can cut down on fatigue and cold-related issues from damp, bitter weather. And it's not just about staying warm. More importantly, it gives Tim a sense of safety and a place to recharge. That's why Tim calls his shelter a home.
But you've never seen a bushcraft shelter like that. Not shelter. Home. That's my home.
Similarly, in Season 7 of Alone, when the ultimate wilderness machine Roland finished building his epic stone house shelter, he also treated it as a home. Tim christens his shelter Moose Insurance, and torch in hand, carries out a little commemorative ritual. At first glance, this kind of self-talk can seem a little crazy, and we often see contestants amusing themselves like this in online clips. They act out other personas or chat with made-up companions. And it's more than just killing time. It genuinely boosts the survivor's mindset and emotional state, especially when they're under intense stress from long isolation and a harsh environment. It not only helps them vent their stress, but also makes the show more fun for viewers. Overall, a positive. As the gap between daytime and nighttime temperatures widens, frost is already showing up at dawn, and the nights keep getting colder. Tim has little time to secure food for winter, so he goes to the shore to check his fishing lines. He wants to stash fish before winter. Their fat makes them ideal reserves for winter. When Tim pulls on the fishing line in the water, he lands a 28-inch pike. Up to this point, he's already pulled in 4 hefty pike, all over 10 pounds. But since he's not hurting for food, he decides to tether them in the river and keep them alive. He grabs a cord, runs a wire through the fish's lower jaw, and cinches into a loop, then puts the pike back into the river. Tim's approach is a clever and practical survival tactic. It extends his food supply and cuts down on waste. Being able to adjust according to changing conditions and survival needs is essential so that when the cold season arrives, he still has a sustainable source of food. Across the Alone series, the trick of keeping fish alive in the river. Across all seasons, almost no one has tried this. Tim's now the top food gatherer in the show's history, with his total food haul exceeding 1,130 gin. As he's making breakfast, another sound comes from the riverbank. He goes to check without the camera, then heads back to camp to grab it and shoot a pickup. Another fish has taken his other line. This time, it's a giant pike over 1 meter long, almost too heavy to hold with one hand.
Look at this. Look at this fish right here, man.
He slips this one back into the river as well, keeping it alive. Turning all that fish into jerky would just lure in mice, martens, wolverines, and other small animals. These animals cause Tim more trouble than the big predators. Tim has barely gotten back to camp when a crow ruins his fresh breakfast fish. He unleashes curses at the crow in the tree as he gets up. The crow comes down again. It's enough to give him a headache. Having too much food is its own kind of problem. At dawn, Tim is livid. The fish in his meat box are half chewed, and the rest feels dirty now. Tim figures it's mice. Turns out you can't look away from your food for a second. If this goes on, his meat stash will be wiped out. So Tim decides to build another food cache to protect it.
I've decided to build a Roland-style food cache on the ground.
He cuts a lot of wood and picks an open spot near camp, planning to build another meat box there. He lays a net at the bottom as a base, but the net doesn't stop mice, so he pulls out the Moosehead to use as a fully sealed meat bag. With 14 inches of Moosehead, critters would struggle to gnaw through it, but those old sword holes were still there. Tim planned to stitch them up with wire. On the multi-tool he brought, there's a small chisel that can be used to mark surfaces or punch tiny holes in leather or wood. You can see that a truly capable Alone contestant has a wide range of practical skills. Hunting and chopping firewood are basic operations. This needlework is on another level. It's as meticulous as a surgeon. Next, he just has to cram over 100 pounds of moose hide into the box, and you can only imagine how comfortable that would be if he used it as a mattress. Moose hair can absorb moisture, so the food inside stays nicely dry. With the moose hide giving full protection, the meat stash inside is now far more secure. Tim then felled more trees, laid the logs over the meat box as a lid, and with that, a perfect meat cache was finished. Even if every scrap of meat is gone, that moose hide alone could keep Tim going for another 10 days of winter. Winter swept over the Mackenzie River in the Arctic Circle, blanketing everything. With that snowfall, the northern wilderness had entered winter. The Borough family brought their kids out to enjoy the first snow, and that cozy moment made Tim miss his own family. But the true deep freeze test on Alone was only just starting. At daybreak, Tim went with his bow to hunt and spotted a bird, probably a raven or eagle, leaving the meat box. Tim was glad it failed, and the meat box was clearly offering solid protection. Yet the logs covering the meat cache were loose. If a black bear or wolverine came by, they wouldn't offer protection. Wolverines are smart, tenacious predators. Road God, Jordan matched wits and will with a wolverine, and wound up cursing his own stupidity. Without a fixed lid on this meat box, he'd probably suffer the same fate as Jordan. Tim decided to install a solid log beam above the meat box to secure the lid. He found a suitable log, then cut grooves into 2 trees, then wedged the log between them so it would stay firmly in
Full
place.
cash. Done. Food's unmovable. Steadfast.
With a wooden box guarding the meat, he can sleep at night more at ease. With his meat cache finally secure, it's time to deal with the pike he's been keeping alive in the river. If it freezes over, if the river iced over, it might cut the rope. But when Tim went down to check his line, the pike he'd been keeping tied there was gone. The biggest one had simply vanished. That single fish alone cost Tim at least 7 full meals. A 40-inch pike holds over 16,000 calories. For Tim, that's a massive loss. The pike was tied off with paracord, so it really shouldn't have gotten loose. Tim figures an otter ripped it off. When it rains, it pours. His second fish is missing. Losing these 2 big fish cost him several days of stored meat. Now he regrets his earlier decision. If he'd known, he'd have smoked all the fish. He processes the remaining fish and stores them in the newly built meat cache shaft. Though Tim still has plenty of meat stored, losing 2 big fish hurts. He goes to check his stored meat every day. And the Marten from a few days ago is back raiding his food. The little thing is really cute, but it's incredibly bold. It doesn't fear Tim at all, and just dashes straight for the meat cache right in front of him. Is it really okay for it to be this brazen? Martens are protected here, so Tim isn't allowed to hunt it. He can only pull out a repellent device and try to drive it off. Does it somehow sense it's protected? How is it this fearless? With the temperature at -3°C, Tim heads down to the riverbank to check his fishing lines. He suddenly notices the line he lost 2 days earlier and uses a stick to pull it out of the water. To his surprise, the pike he tied on with wire was still attached to the line.
I got the fish that got away on the stringer. I cannot believe that.
Tim can barely believe the fish he'd written off has come back. A hefty catch, lost and found. It doesn't just lift his spirits. It also boosts his confidence for what's coming. His meat stash grows by over 10 pounds of fish. As long as he doesn't mentally break down from missing his family, then winning the championship is almost guaranteed. He keeps stashing the processed fish in the wooden box. Back at camp, Tim tries lighting a fire inside his shelter for warmth. But when he built the shelter, he hadn't put in a proper fireplace. So when he lit a fire inside, the smoke couldn't vent properly through the chimney. So the smoke inside quickly built up. He tried to tough it out and keep working for a bit. Eventually, he just couldn't stand it and had to get out. Too much smoke can inflame and swell the lungs, causing oxygen deprivation. If he dozes off with a fire at night, he could end up choking on dense smoke in his sleep without a safe way to build a warming fire in the shelter. With winter closing in, his survival situation is going to get even tougher. The shelter's warmth is key to him getting rest. Without sleep, that meat won't help him. So Tim comes up with something like a range hood smoke baffle. He cuts off a piece of stiff moose hide and hangs it above the fire. It blocks the rising smoke and guides it out through the chimney. This tiny modification completely fixed the smoke venting issue when he lit fires indoors. It spares him building a fireplace and lets him warm the shelter. As he tends the fire, Tim drifts into self-talk.
Bring me a hare or a rabbit. Get to work or I'll stone you.
Maybe it's this prolonged loneliness and isolation that's weighing so heavily on Tim emotionally. His self-entertainment and role-playing aren't just for fun. They're a mental survival tool to handle loneliness, heavy stress, and the brutal reality of living out there. It might be a stress reaction brought on by long-term isolation. While it's a kind of self-regulation, these behaviors appearing more often shows Tim's loneliness is intensifying. Heading out to check his traps, Tim sees the ground blanketed in fresh, thick snow. The surroundings look more like the Arctic now. He takes out Jerky, smoked caribou, now tough from dehydration. His long-term diet has left him malnourished, so his teeth ache sharply whenever he gnaws on the jerky. A similar toothache hit Jordan in episode 6 of Alone while he was eating venison. If he wants to survive here for the long haul, Tim has to keep finding fresh meat. There's nothing in the traps today, and he suddenly finds himself back where he once hunted a caribou, where he comes across a caribou skeleton, unsure if it's the same one he hunted earlier. He begins gathering the caribou bones. Scavengers have already picked the rib meat clean. Tim hacks off a few bones with his axe and hauls them back, but they're not for soup or for eating. They're for crafting various survival tools that will help him hunt and secure fresh meat. Right now, fishing is Tim's best option for getting fresh meat, but with just 4 normal hooks remaining, he decides to carve new gorge hooks from the caribou bones. Unlike other fish hooks, gorge hooks are sharpened at both ends. If these hooks work, Tim can set out a large number of fishing lines, greatly increasing his chances of success. Besides fishing, Tim has also set 5 snare traps in the forest. The rule of Alone is that the contestant who survives the longest becomes the champion, so Tim needs to stockpile more food to extend his time there. But Season 7 features unusual rules. If they reach 100 days, remaining contestants share the prize, and knowing when it ends eases some of the psychological torment. Tim's plan now is to get beyond day 70. He's aware that in this season, Guys like Jack and William are tough competitors, so he has to stockpile even more meat to keep himself going longer. After 3 snares in a row came up empty, when he checked the last one, he finally got a rabbit in that last snare. Tim quickly broke its neck, so squeamish viewers should be cautious watching this part. One rabbit gives him a fair bit of meat, but almost no fat, and can give Tim 2,000 calories. In freezing winter, you need fat, not protein. If he only ate rabbit, he could very well starve to death. Tim plans to cook the rabbit together with caribou meat, which will be a very good balance, not only providing more calories and nutrients for a survivor, while also boosting flavor and shelf life. By cleverly pairing in more fatty foods, he can better safeguard his health under such harsh conditions. Back in the shelter, after tasting the rabbit stew, he felt noticeably better. Yet each day in the brutal Arctic wild still brings new trials. For him, this rabbit is not just a successful hunt, but a breakthrough in survival. The rabbit meat makes up for the monotony of his diet, compared with the smoked venison he usually relies on. Adding rabbit means a more diverse nutritional intake, and it brings some fresh enjoyment to his palate. More importantly, Tim stews the rabbit with caribou fat, boosting the meal's energy density and giving himself a better guarantee of survival for the brutal winter. Tim heads to the shore daily to tend his lines, but the fishing keeps getting tougher. It's -4 degrees Celsius. Snow whirls and the wind slices through. Inside, it feels like spring, showing how well Tim's shelter holds heat. He carves a little fox out of wood as a toy for his son. He has 2 sons, so must make 2 foxes. The squirrel tails are from the first animals Tim hunted. These 2 toys may look ordinary, but for Tim, they're little gadgets to help him pass the time in the Arctic wilderness. From the start until now, he's already lost 30 pounds. Though he has meat every day, the energy he burns is far more than he ever imagined. Chopping wood and checking his lines are now part of his everyday routine. Marten tracks show up along the shore. That little thief is back at the rod trying to steal fish again. The line in the water goes taut. Seems there's a catch
fish on
on
a gorge hook.
Tim's.
Yeah! Guys, I got a fish on a piece of bone. Ha ha!
Gorge hook made from caribou bone has done its job, helping him successfully land a pike. The bone sits jammed sideways in the pike's throat. That fish could never have imagined its throat would be skewered like that.
I just caught this fish on a piece of moose bone. That's the coolest thing ever.
Tim's food supply gets another boost, and with plenty to eat, he barely feels the cold at all in this harsh winter. The satisfied smile on his face says it all. He's brimming with confidence. He can hardly even think of a reason why he would lose this extreme cold challenge. Tim would need to throw the game to lose. We're at day 55. The Arctic is growing colder each day. At dawn, Tim's already in his shelter chewing on jerky. Yesterday, he skipped eating to rest his teeth, and to his surprise, he slept great. Tim figures he got about 8 hours. After a solid rest, Tim feels recharged and goes to check his snares and traps. He aims to snare a rabbit daily. Paired with caribou fat, it tastes amazing. Besides setting snares, once the river freezes over, he can also try ice fishing. But when Tim checks his snares, he finds that the line has been
You can see the end of the
snapped.
wire right there. Busted snare means an animal got away.
From the scuffed up ground, it's clear the animal fought wildly and broke free. Tim surveys the area but spots no new rabbit tracks, though his jerky stash could carry him to day 100. Going several days without any fresh protein makes him feel a bit anxious. Any strong contestant knows they must stockpile meat. Having food is what truly makes them feel secure. That night, as Tim stews meat in his shelter, he hears something moving outside. A Wolverine has come near the camp, apparently to steal some meat.
Something making a weird noise from my food cache. I'm gonna go look.
Tim puts on his headlamp and goes out to check, but doesn't find anything. At daybreak, Tim goes back to inspect his meat cache and sees lots of Wolverine tracks in the snow and a wooden bucket lying on the ground. It's the bucket he uses for pike offal, and every bit of bait in it has been taken and eaten. Following the tracks, Tim heads down to the riverbank and figures the
Think
Wolverine
he'll be
will
back
be back.
for sure. I'm gonna keep an eye out to kill that baby. I wanna eat that thing.
If Tim can take this Wolverine, then winning the $1 million prize is only a matter of time. He returns to his shelter, takes bow and arrows, and checks the meadow where he once hunted caribou. He finds many Wolverine tracks. Wolverines travel 24 kilometers daily searching for food, which Tim finds incredible. Just how keen must these animals' noses be? To sniff out his meat cache from far away is impressive, regardless of how sharp its smell is. In any case, from the moment it stole his bait, Tim resolved that this Wolverine would pay in blood. He tore down every snare and trap, intending to reuse the cords as an alarm rig to catch the Wolverine. A silent man versus Wolverine battle was now underway. On day 58, while out exploring, Tim picked up a caribou antler. He chose to reshape the antler, lashing driftwood to it to make a simple instrument. So much time alone in the wilderness was starting to push his mind toward the edge. He tried all sorts of ways to ease the strain. This antler-backed fiddle was one way to kill time and keep himself entertained. The late stage of Alone is a psychological war, and whoever endures becomes champion. They can give themselves a daily survival job to finish, building confidence that they'll make it through. They need to avoid idleness and thoughts of family, and, like Tim, set small goals. For example, putting on an Arctic wilderness
If you
concert.
find my body on the field of battle, I'll be walking. If you pick me up where I fall from my saddle, I'll be riding. I live life free until disaster comes. La 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 lee. Until it comes for me. La 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 la.
Time quickly moved on to day 61, and the sun was especially bright that day. In his cabin, Tim gazed at the snowy expanse as a venison stew simmered. He also had firewood to keep the shelter warm. Tim was the strongest survivor this season. He planned to divide smoked venison into 2 categories, using a short-sleeve shirt as a meat belt. He separated the meat into soft and hard. The softer pieces he could chew and eat immediately, while the tough jerky needed stewing. As he organized the venison, he discovered some pieces had gone moldy.
I can't believe the jerky's growing mold, guys.
Cut the mold off and eat those first.
How is this happening?
Here we need to pause and explain. Although smoking meat can effectively extend its shelf life, even in cold conditions, changes in humidity and temperature still affect how well jerky keeps. Even in the daytime, it stays cold, and at night, moisture condenses, leaving the meat damp and prone to mold, creating ideal conditions for mold to grow. On top of that, Tim kept a fire going in the shelter around the clock for warmth, and the warmer air inside sped up bacterial growth on the jerky. Just like what happens in Alone Season 7. Roland stacked his berries in the shelter, and they spoiled and molded again. Tim's fare is stewed fish and meat, with jerky for snacks, keeping his protein levels up. Tim may be the most at ease contestant I've ever seen out here alone. A well-built Arctic cabin, snow swirling outside, yet inside is spring warm. Meat stew simmering. Tim eats meat every day. He still feels a deep craving for food. With the endless Arctic nights stretching to 18 hours, a freedom-loving man like Tim must endure long hours in this cramped, suffocating cabin. Thoughts of his family start to grow stronger and stronger. He wishes the ordeal would end, and each day he looks for things that lift his spirits and keep him focused. He keeps busy with daily tasks, not allowing himself to stop. His thoughts would drown in longing for family. It's -7 degrees Celsius. The Mackenzie has iced over solid, so Tim turns to ice fishing for more food. He lashes his axe to a rope so it won't slip into the river as he chops through the ice. Once he's chopped a hole, he drops in prime round venison for bait, trusting the fish will recognize quality. Tim opens several holes in the ice to boost his odds of catching something. As long as lines are in the water, a fish will bite. But ice fishing in such brutal cold is the toughest physical challenge for Tim. Working out on the ice so long leaves his hands and feet going numb and stiff. Back at the shelter, he immediately starts a fire to warm up. He grabs a handful of dead, dry spruce needles to light, and they flare like gunpowder, exploding into flame instantly. Worried the fire will grow and catch the shelter roof, Tim hurriedly props a pot of meat over the flames to block them. If he accidentally set the shelter alight, everything he had built and prepared would go up in flames along with it. Luckily, he got the blaze under control, and the close call didn't become a real disaster. After this episode, Tim began to recognize the flaws in his shelter. He couldn't count on being this lucky next time, so he decided to remodel the shelter. To avoid a repeat of the incident, Tim rose early that morning and began renovating his shelter. As long as the fire pit remained a safety hazard, he wouldn't feel truly at ease. At this critical stage, any mistake could force him to tap out. He removed the caribou hide from the top of the shelter. The roof over the fire pit was already charring, and if it kept up, it could easily catch fire. Tim laid the hide back over one side of the shelter roof, where it could help protect the roof. But with the caribou hide that had served as a smoke baffle now removed, he knew that whenever he lit a fire, smoke would once again
So now I don't
fill
have
the
a
entire
smoke
shelter.
shield range hood here, but I'll just have to get by.
Lit a new fire to test it, and the inside did fill with smoke like before. Though it turned out better than he'd feared, still just about bearable overall. Tim's situation now is bad. He hasn't brought in any food for quite a while. His fishing lines, snares, and traps have all turned up empty. Part of his jerky has already gone moldy and spoiled, and what food he has left can't sustain him much longer. His fear of running out of food has come true. The temperature is -12 degrees Celsius. Outside, a white snow blanket covers all, and a squirrel scurries in the trees, perhaps hoping Tim might toss it a scrap of meat. But Tim himself is in dire straits. He's a clay Buddha crossing a river, can't save himself or help others. He eats enough to stay within the rules. Tim walks down to the river to check his lines. Snow now lies over 10 centimeters deep, making steps treacherous, creating danger for ice fishing. Snow is an insulator, slowing the freezing process and leaving the ice weaker. Even though it's very cold now, Tim can see a lot of water beneath the snow. Farther out, the river shows open water, so it's not fit for ice fishing. When he opens up the ice hole, there's no fish on the line, but the bait is missing. That's encouraging. It shows the fish are still eating. The second fishing line also comes up empty. The bitter cold of the Arctic wilderness is making Tim's toes ache. Last night, his feet throbbed, like in Season 7 of Alone in the Wilderness. A boxer quit because of frostbitten toes. After Tim returned to the shelter, he checked his feet. He judges only by the color of his toes.
It's not black
And
it's gray, and I would call it more like frost and nip.
if it's not frostbite, it's no big deal. Stay warm, watch it, and you'll bounce back. Morning of day 68, Tim goes to the meadow to clear his throat. By now, the meadow lay under deep snow, and he hadn't seen any moose in ages. Tim figured the caribou had probably drifted over toward Jack's camp, or maybe bolted off toward William. He doesn't realize Jack had already been pulled from the game during the day 21 medical check. He even assumes that William might have taken down a moose as
I
well.
think he's killed a moose.
In truth, taking down a moose is far harder than he thought. Not everyone who's lucky enough to see a caribou manages to take one. For instance, Dub this season bumped into a reindeer right at the start, but he wasn't prepared to hunt. He just watched the caribou for a bit, then left. You've got to admit, he really let a great chance slip away. On day 24, Dub saw a moose appear on the meadow in front of his shelter. He tried mimicking a moose call to draw it closer, and the bull came in. Dub grabbed his bow and arrows and closed in to hunt, but by the time he got to his spot, the moose was already gone. On day 27, Dub was on the riverbank cleaning grouse when a few wolves showed up across the river. Since moose were out of reach, bagging a wolf was a decent choice. Yet he didn't try. Watched the wolves drift off. The cowardly chicken tempted him more. Day 31, Dub headed to the riverbank to fish like always, when a moose suddenly showed up ahead and drew his eye. A bull moose came right to the bank to watch him fish, swaggering past in front of him. Dub's reaction stunned me. He stood with his bow, watching the moose walk past. The moose left, and he didn't take a shot. Why Dub didn't hunt? You can all figure it out yourselves. The first time he saw a moose, he went in to hunt it. Why did he just stand and watch the second time? The river is at most 20 meters wide, about the same distance as when Tim hunted his caribou. Jordan and Roland dropped caribou and musk ox from over 100 meters, while Dub stood, looking around, perhaps feeling regret. Arctic winter tightened its icy grip, and Tim now spent each day hauling loads of firewood just to stay warm. Gathering wood was his main winter routine. Winter arrived late for Tim. If, like Roland, he dropped a musk ox and then had snow the next day, that would have been ideal. Tim's caribou meat was almost gone, and he still hadn't managed to get any fresh food. Was his ex-wife's line really coming true? Get a caribou at the wrong time, and you still end up losing. Tim took down that caribou while still in short sleeves, in a mild 14-degree warmth. Since he didn't store the meat well, much venison spoiled. Later in winter, he saw another caribou family, but back then, Tim still had plenty of supplies, so he chose not to go after them again. Now he's troubled by food shortages, lying on his bed, and to worsen matters, his boots got burned. The smoother it was early on, the more his luck seems to have turned. These are his only winter boots to keep warm. He takes out the inner liner to inspect it. Luckily, it's fine. He heads out to check his fishing lines, figuring a short walk over the snow won't be a problem. He gets out onto the ice to check the lines, chops through with his axe, and as he pulls the line up,
Hey, a fish! Yeah! Got a fish finally!
the instant that fish bursts up through the ice, you'd never think it's basically worth $1 million. Because out here in this brutal Arctic ordeal, that single fish will keep him going for a week. He treats it like gold, his joy intense. He's almost speechless. His heartfelt laughter ringing through the empty wild is the perfect answer to this hard-won reward. The fruits of victory never fail those who strive for life. Back at the shelter, Tim doesn't cook the fish right away. He grabs a charcoal pencil and sketches a ration plan for the fish on birch bark, though he's already so hungry he can hardly move. If he wants to last longer in this frozen land, prudent rationing is his best bet. In the Arctic Circle, winter means 18 hours of night, yet Tim sleeps only about 8 hours a day. The remaining 10 hours he spends in the shelter, waiting for daylight. When boredom creeps in, he carves wooden toys to pass time. These toys are also key to his survival in this silent, bitterly cold Arctic. Tim's carved wooden toys have become an emotional anchor for him. This simple act of carving toys is much more than just killing time. It's a way Tim softens his loneliness. Toys cheer him and help him continue in the wild. They're his emotional fuel out here in the wild. But games are games. Fun is fun. Food is key to survival here. Tim takes a gill net and heads onto the ice. He'll begin winter fishing with a gill net, gauging span under the ice. then cutting 2 holes. He fastens a branch to the rope and runs it under the ice until it emerges from the second hole. Tim then uses the rope to drag the fishing net over to the second hole. Once the net is set, Tim returns to the shelter to warm up. His right foot has completely lost feeling, and his left foot isn't better. In this cold, his blood vessels constrict, slowing blood flow and oxygen delivery in his body, cutting off circulation to his feet, leading to numbness. Heating a pot of water to soak his feet might ease the numbness caused by poor circulation. The numbness in both feet is already wrecking his sleep. Last night he managed barely an hour. After 17 hours of foot numbness, he's thinking about quitting the challenge. Even now, his legs haven't bounced back. Bad circulation can bring muscle weakness, sharp pain, and numbness, making it hard for him to get around. Back in the shelter, Tim brews pine needle tea to warm himself. He eats daily, yet his body still can't stay warm. This may be related to his extremely low body fat. Physically, he's not in great condition, but his mindset stays upbeat. It's the contestant's medical checkup day. Tim sits in his shelter, quietly watching the fire before him. That slight smile feels like a powerless nod to the wild. At the contestant's medical checkup, Tim ends up the skinniest of the 3 finalists. After the check, Dubug says something with deeper meaning.
When they came up saying I had a med check, I was like, dude, this has got to be it. No, it isn't. It's back to wood cutting and freezing my ass off for I don't know how many more days now. Oh, I want out of here.
Tim had actually assumed this checkup meant the crew was here to declare him the winner. To his disappointment, that wasn't the case. He still has to keep chopping wood and surviving in this wild land. And that's not even the worst of it. If Biduk saw Tim's stash of dried moose meat, I bet he'd throw in the towel right there. Maybe since he hasn't had this jerky in ages, but suddenly it tastes pretty good again. This bag of jerky is Tim's last real safety net out here. He'll break into it only if he's out of options. All that jerky has ground down his molars, and his gums keep bleeding. Out here, a problem like that really can't be ignored. Damaged, exposed gums can cause infection and gingivitis, bringing pain and swelling. Tim's top priority now is fresh food, so he goes to the riverbank to check his gill nets. Noticing the fishing line on the ice hasn't budged, he figures there are probably no fish. Sure, it's as he feared. He resets the line and puts it in place. Checking the second line, he finds it empty too. So Tim pulls a piece of fish from his meat cache. He'd meant to save that fish for his own dinner, but then he thinks about the small animals out there that might be starving too. He ends up leaving the fish outside for the hungry animals instead. Maybe this small act of kindness is exactly what costs Tim the $1 million prize later on. By the final stretch, the temperature has plunged to minus 20 degrees. Tim feels fortunate to have made it to day 77. Back on day 75, he played chess. Every day he plays, eliminating some pieces. This homemade board game is fascinating. It's what carries Tim through all his empty hours out here. But today is the grand finale of that game. In this game, a piece called Timber finally takes the win. It's the polar night in the Arctic Circle, so the sun stays below the horizon for ages, and even at daytime the world is stuck in a dull half-light. The snowy landscape around him looks bleak. So long without seeing the sun has dragged Tim's mood down. When he goes out to check his snares, he spots long absent rabbit tracks in the snow.
Yes! Ha-ha!
And finds that one of his snares has finally caught a rabbit. This rabbit is hugely important to Tim. It's not just about getting some fresh meat. The rabbit's organs are a precious source of nutrients. Its liver is rich in vitamin A and iron, which can boost Tim's immunity in the extreme cold and help prevent anemia. Back at the shelter, Tim first eats the rabbit's organs and head. The head and brain, parts people don't usually value, actually give Tim badly needed protein and fat. In the freezing Arctic, this simple rabbit feast replenishes his body and gives him the drive to keep going. On day 81, Tim wakes up early and sits in his shelter. He remembers those first days when the river's waterfowl were roaringly loud and how much he enjoyed that wild chorus of animal calls. But once winter set in, it was as if someone hit the mute button. The land fell quiet and the sky grew lifeless. This gloomy world has taken a heavy toll on his mind. He has never felt this lonely before. By the time it's daylight, already nearing noon, Tim walks to the river to check his lines. The temperature is minus 23 degrees Celsius, but there's still water beneath the snow, and Tim can hear the ice crack. He sees the ice is too dangerous, and risking a fall, hurriedly pulls in his lines. With that, his hopes of fishing vanish, and Tim can only rely on his snares and traps now. Back at the shelter, Tim sits down and begins to relive his whole journey here. He feels his days have been rich and rewarding. Though he could stretch dried meat to survive until day 100, the rock-hard jerky has made his teeth ache. And deep down, Tim has already begun to accept the idea of losing.
I don't need to prove anything. I am who I am. I know that it will go way past 100 days.
The instant he walks out of shelter, I sense the outcome. In wind and snow, he pauses. satellite phone in hand. Maybe he's reluctant to let go of what he's poured in, yet from day one, no day was wasted. Tim stands in the blizzard, clutching the phone with both hands, each breath like a knife of cold in his chest. He knows that no matter what he decides, this challenge has already been a remarkable journey for him. He hesitates, as if some inner resolve is still urging him to stay. Ultimately, Tim can't overcome this mental hurdle. He could quit, but not today. 2 days later at dawn, Tim in his shelter chewing venison. The meat is so tough, it makes his teeth ache. Yet he still doesn't try softening it in the iron pot. He knows this jerky can carry him to day 100, but the endless waiting makes him wonder what he's holding on to. If it's just about the money, he's beginning to feel it isn't worth it anymore. Right now, the wide shot is perfect. Outside, the snow is pouring down. Inside, it's as cozy as spring. Through his own skill, Tim has built a better life in this Arctic wasteland, rising from nothing to what he has now. He no longer needs to prove his wilderness abilities to anyone, and so he calms down. He realizes he doesn't want to keep waiting here aimlessly just for the sake
I've
of
done
money.
83 days.
This time,
I've succeeded.
Hi, this is Timber. I'm officially tapping out today.
Tim calmly grabbed the phone and called, no longer hesitating. When the crew showed up, he faced the camera and plainly shared why he decided to tap out.
I'm not being forced out by anything. I'm super happy. I'm happier than I've been in years. I feel alive. I feel fully alive. And I feel that I've really won the battle.
He was happy to have spent this time here. During these days, he felt immense joy. He had once looked forward, been thrilled, resisted, felt anxious, and held on. On the board, pieces obeyed his will, but in life, nothing moves neatly. Tim's departure wasn't forced by harsh conditions, but a choice he embraced. As the contestant who secured the most food in the history of Alone, from day 1 all the way to day 83, he managed to eat meat every single day, making him the one contestant in the show's history who lived as the happiest. If bagging big game makes a person a legend, then Tim is more like a frenzied war god. In this extreme cold challenge, Tim lost with honor. In loneliness, exhaustion, and hardship, he refused to give up. In this battle with the wild and himself, he finally won a victory that was his. Tim shows us that out in the wild, what matters most isn't just survival, but hardening the spirit. That's all for this episode of the Champions series. Go ahead and like and subscribe. More episodes in this series are coming.